word, Lord, we just ask you, Lord, to be with Pastor Steve this evening. That your words be speaking through him, Lord. That it be your Holy Spirit speaking through him. We thank you for his life, Lord. We thank you that you brought him to this church, Father God. You brought him with a purpose. And we've seen great things already happening, and we know that there is so much more to come. We just thank you, Father God, for his life. Ask you to continue to bless him, Lord, and to be with him. And we just thank you for each and every single person that's here, for their support, for their love. We are very thankful. And we just ask you, Lord, to speak to us this evening, that we can receive whatever it is that you have for us. We thank you, Father God, for the goodness, for your love. Thank you for how great you are. You are a wonderful and awesome God, Lord. One who is worthy of all our praise. We thank you, Father God, for all these things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You may be seated.
It was September 10th, 2001. I'll always remember the date because of what happened the next day, although I surely would have remembered what happened on this day regardless. That date stands out a little bit. We were on vacation. Our family was on vacation in Williamsburg, Virginia. And on that day, it was kind of cloudy, so we didn't go to the beach. And we just stayed at our resort. And I went to the pool. And I always take books with me if I'm on vacation or going on a retreat or something. And I brought several with me that time. And I decided that day to read this book that I kind of hoped I'd never read. It wasn't that I hated it or something without having read it. It's that I already knew what it said. So I knew I didn't really need to read it. It was Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church. Well, I took it to the pool that day and I started to read it. And partway through the first chapter, Rick Warren starts talking about the idea that it's not the job of church leaders to sort of carve out their own niche, to build their own thing, to create their own strategy, but rather to be like a surfer. And like a surfer, to identify the next wave of God's moving in the world and to ride that wave. Well, I don't know about you. I've tried surfing before and it did not go well. I knew about direction, that you had to be going the right direction. I even knew about movement. What I didn't know about was speed. I didn't really understand that you have to be nearly up to the speed of the wave when it gets to you, or it's going to rush on past and you're left in the swale behind, waving and saying, I hope I catch the next one. That happened to me quite a few times. I also think that that is the position the church finds itself in far too often. That God is moving in the world, and rather than get ourselves up to speed so that we can catch and ride that wave, at best, we get direction and we get some movement, but find ourselves in the swale behind the wave of God's moving, hoping that we'll catch up sometime, or that another wave will come along and we'll do better. I came unglued at that point. In fact, I still have never read another page in that book. I just started weeping by the pool. I put on my sunglasses, even though it was a really kind of gloomy day, so nobody would see me weeping by the pool. And I made God a promise that day. I said, if you will somehow figure out how to get through this thick skull of mine and help me to understand how you're moving, what's the next wave of your moving by the Spirit in the world, I will do whatever it takes to be there and to ride that wave. I'll do whatever it takes. Well, you fast forward a few years, and as a result, primarily, of that day, If that day hadn't happened, I don't know if the rest ever would. I mean, maybe, but I don't really know. But I know for sure that day was a turning point. It was a linchpin in my life. And over the course of the next few years, I became convinced that God was showing me something that was consistent with the moving of the Spirit in the world for the church. And I decided that I would do whatever it took to ride it. And so in June of 2006, I did the stupidest thing I've ever done. I moved to Toledo, a city I was not from, with my wife and 3 teenagers, without a job or place to live, to try to do ministry I wasn't sure would work with people I didn't know how to meet. Strangely, Harvard Business has not called me to teach strategic planning as a guest lecturer. It really was the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. You can't justify that, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I did it in the end because I knew that if I said no to what I was so convinced of, it was going to require me to kill something inside. And I might never get it back. I wanted to do whatever it took to be where God was moving, where God is moving. Well, what I want to talk to you about tonight is a passage. It's rather obscure, at least the part I want to talk to you about is from 2 Samuel chapter 6, in the first 15 verses, and it reads like this. Once again, David assembled the select warriors of Israel, 30,000 strong. David and all the troops who were with him set out for Baalah, which is Kiriath Jearim of Judah, to bring God's chest up from there. The chest that is called by the name of the Lord of heavenly forces, who sits enthroned on the winged creatures. They loaded God's chest on a new cart and carried it from Abinadab's house, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, were driving the new cart. Uzzah was beside God's chest, while Ahio was walking in front of it. Meanwhile, David and the entire house of Israel celebrated in the Lord's presence with all their strength, with songs, zithers, harps, tambourines, rattles, and cymbals. When they approached Nacon's threshing floor, Uzzah reached out to God's chest and grabbed it because the oxen had stumbled. The Lord became angry at Uzzah, and God struck him there because of his mistake, and he died there next to God's chest. Then David got angry because the Lord's anger lashed out against Uzzah. And so that place is called Perez Uzzah even today. David was frightened by the Lord that day. How will I ever bring the Lord's chest to me? He asked. So David didn't take the chest away with him to David's city. Instead, he had it put in the house of Obed-Edom, who was from Gath. The Lord's chest stayed with Obed-Edom's household in Gath for 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom's household and all that he had. King David was told, the Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's family and everything he has because of God's chest being there. So David went and brought God's chest up from Obed-Edom's house to David's city with celebration. Whenever those bearing the chest advanced 6 steps, David sacrificed an ox and a fatling calf. David, dressed in a linen priestly vest, danced with all his strength before the Lord. This is how David and the entire house of Israel brought up the Lord's chest with shouts and trumpet blasts. So in order to really get what this story is talking about, we actually have to rewind an entire book to 1 Samuel chapters 4, 5, and 6, where the backdrop is painted for this story. What was happening at the time was the Israelites were in a series of battles with the Philistines, and they kept losing. They were routed over and over and over again. This was frustrating and embarrassing to them. And then finally, one day, somebody had this brilliant, beyond brilliant idea that if we get the Ark of the Covenant, God's chest, where the manifest presence of God dwells, where God's glory dwells, and we bring it to the battlefield, that will ensure our victory. Surely. That will ensure our victory. So they bring it from Shiloh to Ebenezer, the place of the next battle with the Philistines. Unfortunately, what they thought, what they were betting on, didn't actually happen that way, and the army was routed again. And not only was the army routed at Ebenezer, but they captured the Ark of the Covenant. The Philistines captured the chest. So, a runner who was a Benjamite, somebody from the tribe of Benjamin, ran from the battlefield all the way back to Shiloh, which, by the way, was the religious capital of Israel during the time of the Judges. Runs all the way to Shiloh, and somewhere like in the town square, people are gathered. They want news of the battle, and this guy gives them the news that the army has been defeated, soundly defeated, and the Philistines have captured the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God. And this cry of grief and mourning and agony goes up from the town. And it's so loud that Eli, the priest, you might remember him from Samuel's story, Eli is now 98 years old, and wherever he is, he hears this cry of agony go up, and he inquires as to what's going on. And somebody comes and tells him, the army has been defeated at Ebenezer. Your sons, Hophni and Phinehas, have both been killed on the battlefield, and the Philistines have captured the Ark of God. Eli is so distraught. He's very old, and he's a really big guy, and he tries to move on his chair, and he falls over, and he breaks his neck and dies. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Eli's daughter-in-law, who is very pregnant at this point, hears the story. She hears the news that the army has been routed at Ebenezer, that her husband and her brother-in-law have been killed on the field of battle. Her father-in-law now has died upon hearing the news, and the Philistines have the Ark of God. She goes into labor. And she dies as a result of this labor, but not before giving birth to a son and naming him Ichabod. Which means the glory has departed, or no glory. She dies, but she names this son this because all the glory is gone out of Israel. The ark is gone. The presence of God is gone from them. Well, back at the battlefield, the Philistines are trying to figure out what to do with this new trophy. So they decide they're going to take it west and down the coast to Ashdod, one of the 5 great Philistine cities at the time. And they take it to the temple of Dagon, one of their gods. And they take it in there, and they get some interior designer to come in and place it carefully next to the statue of Dagon. And they step back and say, wow, really nice work. You should get paid to do this. And they go on about their business for the rest of the day. But they come back the next morning to the temple, and they find Dagon's statue is toppled over on the floor. And they're going, oh, well, we must have jostled him when we were putting this box into place or something. So they set him back up, and they step back, and they think that it's all secure and everything's good now, and that just looks great, doesn't it? So they go on about the rest of their day, and they come back again the next morning, and they find Dagon's statue toppled over again, this time with the head and the hands broken off. It was a big smackdown by the Ark of the Covenant over Dagon during those couple of days. But then the other thing that was going on was the whole town was overrun by rats. Like it's just an infestation of rats, which is very uncomfortable, you might know. And then the other thing that was happening was there were tumors inflicting everybody in the town. Now when I say tumor, what I actually mean is probably hemorrhoids. Probably hemorrhoids. It was very uncomfortable in Ashdod with the Ark of God in town. So they didn't want, they're going, let's get rid of this thing. Everything was great here in Ashdod until that box came to town. Let's get rid of the thing. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? What do you think? I know, let's send it to Ekron, one of the other 5 great Philistine cities, a fairly short distance away. So they think, great idea. Let's send it to them. Let them deal with all this stuff. But the reputation of the ark has preceded it. So the people of Ekron, seeing that it's coming, they're going, we don't want that here. And they start talking among them. And they get the advice that they should just check this out and see if all of this has been coincidence or if this is really the God of the Israelites that is inhabiting this thing, and they better get rid of it. So here's what they decide to do. There's great wisdom in this. They build a new cart. And they put it on 2 cows that have given birth but have never been yoked before. And they decide they're going to let's send it with a guilt offering of 5 golden rats and 5 golden tumors. Well, you know how you do something like that, right? You got to make a mold. Who wants that job? Like, who wants to make the mold of the hemorrhoids? Anybody? No? No takers? But that's what they did. So they make these 5 golden rats and the 5 golden hemorrhoids, and they put them in a box on the cart, and then they put the chest of God on the cart on these cows, and they decide, okay, no GPS, no instructions. We're not even going to print out one of the old MapQuest things. We're just going to turn this thing loose and see where it goes. And if it goes to Beth Shemesh, which was the nearest Israeli-held city, then we'll know that God was in this, and it'll be good to be rid of it. But if not, we'll know it was all coincidence, and we'll keep the thing, and if nothing else, we can liquidate it after all its gold. Well, so they get all of this ready, and then they turn the cows loose, and they make a beeline for Beth Shemesh. Go straight to Joshua's house in Beth Shemesh. Well, when they see that, all of the priests and the diviners and all the other people, all the other leaders and those who were hangers-on that had followed the thing to see where it went, they all go skulking back off to Ekron and Ashdod. Like, whew, good thing we got rid of that. Well, so because they're Israelites, they know what to do with the thing. So the Levites come and they take the thing off the cart and they put it on a rock so they're going to be able to sacrifice and to worship there. Well, curiosity kills 70 Beth Shemesh cats who can't resist the temptation to peek into the thing. And it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. They just can't resist. So curiosity kills those cats, and then they don't want it either. The Israelites don't want it either. So they send it further on to Kiriath Jearim, to Abinadab's house, where his son Eleazar is consecrated to guard the Ark of the Covenant. And by the way, the Ark stays there for 20 years. 20 years at Abinadab's house. Until David, having finally conquered all of his enemies, all of Israel's foes, decides that he's going to find the Ark again and bring it back to Jerusalem as the ultimate trophy of his triumph. Kiriath Jearim is 10 to 12 miles west of Jerusalem, and eventually he found it there, and so they go to pick that up. But by that time, the Israelites had grown quite accustomed to living in Ichabod. They had become quite accustomed to living in Ichabod apart from the glory of God, outside the presence of God. They had become accustomed to living without God in their midst, without this immediate presence. Oh, we know that it's not really the box, but for them, that's what it was. And they had become accustomed to being without it. And that's where we pick up the story in 2 Samuel chapter 6. But this message that I want to share with you tonight is not about what David did wrong. It's not about what Uzzah did wrong or anything like that. It's not even so much about what somebody else might have done right. This message is just about the most obscure part of this passage. About an obscure character in it named Obed-Edom. And it's about you and me and the question that we all face. Have you ever imagined what that exchange might have been like when they dropped off the ark at Obed-Edom's house? I have. You know, when David decided that he couldn't take the ark, when David decided that they couldn't handle God coming to Jerusalem because they were so used to living in Ichabod that his power scared them right out of it. Do you think, imagine this, do you think they went up and they left it on the porch, rang the doorbell, and ran away, hid in the bushes to see when they answered the door, thinking what they were going to do with it? I don't know. But let's just imagine what that might have been like. So it's late in the afternoon one day, and Obed-Edom has come in from the field. It's not quite time for supper yet, but he's in cleaning up from his work day. The kids are home from school, and there comes a knock on the door. Obed-Edom goes to the door, creaky opens the thing. Yes. Secret Service guy out there goes, Mr. Obed-Edom? He got the name off the mailbox, of course. Yes. Well, Mr. Obed-Edom, do you see that man back over my shoulder down in the road back there? Yes, I see him. Well, sir, that's King David, and King David would like to know, would you be willing to keep God for a while? Well, I think that might be all right. Let me check with my wife. Honey! King David wants to know if we can keep God for a while. Yeah, that's okay. Sure, bring him right in here. And he goes into the living room and he clears some space, some toys and Xboxes and PlayStations and all that away from the TV and clears the space, and they put down the Ark of God right next to the TV, and they go out the front door, down the walk, pick up David, and head back to Jerusalem. Obed-Edom comes over and he slowly closes the door. Bobby and Susie are in the room, and so is Mrs. Obed-Edom. And they just plop down on the couch and stare at the box on the floor next to the TV. Well, then it's time for supper, and they finish getting all of that together, and they go to eat. And the box is in the living room, but they're in the kitchen to eat, but it doesn't really matter because for them, the box is right there. It's very immediate. And Bobby and Susie they're eating their peas without being asked. And they're not picking at each other like they usually do at meal times. Mrs. Obed-Edom about drops her cup of tea when Mr. Obed-Edom offers to wash dishes. When the meal's over. After all of that's done and everything is cleaned up, the whole family goes back into the living room and they sit together on the couch watching the box on the floor next to the TV. It wasn't even on. I don't know about you, but at my house, if the TV's not on, it's going to take something that big. But that's what they're doing, and they just sit and they watch this box, and they're so captivated by it, and there's something so different about it, and something so different about its presence with them. Well, finally bedtime comes, and Bobby and Susie agree to go to bed without having to be asked twice. They brush their teeth and say their prayers without incident. There is a calm over the house that night, and that night, for the first time in 6 months, little Bobby Obed-Edom slept through the night without a nightmare that started several months before when a fox got in and killed some of the sheep in their pen. But that night, he slept like a baby the whole night long. I don't know exactly what all that was like. I just know that the text says that for 90 days, the Obed-Edoms and all of their household and everything they had was blessed. What does that mean, that it was all blessed like that? Kids getting straight A's in school and good citizenship awards. Sitting first chair in the band. On the whatever sports teams they're interested in. The crops are coming in. The harvest is bigger than they've ever seen. Carrots are growing as big as your arm, and cabbages as big as a basketball. The camels are pregnant. The donkeys are pregnant. The sheep are pregnant. Even Mrs. Obed-Edom is pregnant. Rabbinical writings actually say that the blessing came in the form of children, and that Mrs. Obed-Edom and all 6 of their daughters-in-law were pregnant during this time. Everything about their life was blessed. The family is getting along. Mrs. Obed-Edom smiles over her cup of tea as she thinks about how wonderful things have been in their family, thinking about how attentive Mr. Obed-Edom has been, how wonderful the children have been, how the dishes keep getting washed every night. All of life is full of goodness, and epitomizes shalom, the complete harmony and well-being of all of life. But then comes a day 90 days later, and Mr. Obed-Edom has come in from the field late in the afternoon again. It's not yet supper time, and there comes another knock at the door. Mr. Obed-Edom goes over and he opens the door. Creak. Yes? Same Secret Service guys. And one of them says, Mr. Obed-Edom? Yes. Is God still here? Yes, he is. He's right over. But they didn't wait for his answer. They pushed by him, and with great determination, they come over to the ark, and the Levites come, and they slide the poles through the rings, and they pick it up on their shoulders, and they go rushing past the family, out the door, down the sidewalk, down to the street, singing, "We bring the sacrifice of praise." They disappear down the street. Mr. Obed-Edom and his wife and their children stand at the open door watching for as long as they can see any sign of the box. And then slowly close the door on the scene. They all walk over and sit on the couch again, staring at the space on the floor next to the TV where the box had been. It was a different kind of quiet at the dinner table that night. There was a sad quiet at dinner, still eating their peas and washing the dishes. But there was a solemnity to the scene. It was an empty kind of quiet, sitting together and staring at the empty space next to the TV. Kind of quiet that first touches a soul when it realizes that it's back in Ichabod. That the glory has departed again. And all that that thought carries with it. That night, the kids still went to bed without being asked twice, brushed their teeth, said their prayers, but that night, little Bobby had the first nightmare he had had in 3 months. It's interesting to note, to me at least, that this man, Obed-Edom, whose house and everything about his life was blessed for those 90 days, is mentioned elsewhere in the Hebrew Scriptures. 1 Chronicles 15 and 16 both name Obed-Edom among those who were named to be gatekeepers of the ark in Jerusalem. He might have been, scholars are not certain about his origins, he might have been a lower level Levite. It says that he played the harp and all of that, so he might have been a lower ranking Levite, and that's how he ended up in that position. Others suggest that because of where he lived in Gath, that he might also have been actually a Philistine who was favored because he succeeded with the ark when nobody else did, when not even David did. But regardless of all that, it doesn't matter. What we can actually know about Obed-Edom was that he was not willing to live in Ichabod anymore. That was not going to fly with him. Not again. And he would do whatever it took to be where God was. So Obed-Edom and his family moved from the country to the dirty, smelly city, gave up land and farm and country living, apparently, just to be where God was. He wasn't commuting 12 miles into Jerusalem every day. No Honda here. Whether he was, oh, and by the way, a gatekeeper is a lowly position. It's not like you moved into town because you got this great job offer. A gatekeeper was like a porter in a hotel. This was a lowly position. But whether he was a Levite who'd been given duties because of how he succeeded with God during, his absence, God's absence, or if he was a Philistine that somehow learned that God was God while that blessing was in his house, Obed-Edom just knew that he had to be where God was. So he sold his stuff and moved his family to a place he was not from. He accepted a low-paying job, low status, low station in life, just to be where God was. Just to be there. Because he was willing to do anything to be in that place. Truth is, for all of us, it's easy to forget the sad and quiet emptiness that first comes when we lose our connection to God's presence. When the glory of God's movement and presence first disappear from our experience of life. It's easy to forget that after a little while. We learn to adjust to what's missing. We learn to get by with what we've got and do okay at it, at least on the outside. We forget what the blessing felt like when it was fresh and vital and immediate. Here, now. We can avoid the reminders. Sometimes we work pretty hard at it. We can avoid the reminders that there once was something different, something greater, something more real, personal, and transformative in our lives. Something that was all of that characterized our very life together and with God. And we can, at least in time, given enough time, we can even convince ourselves that nothing is lacking. That all is not only normal, but good and full and rich. We can convince ourselves of this. But every once in a while, because of God's grace, a little taste, a little reminder. And it's our chance to ask this one single question of ourselves. As individuals, as collectives of one form or another, as a church. These reminders of what it was like when God's presence and glory were real among us. We get to ask, am I, or are we, going to be willing to live in Ichabod again? Or will we be willing to do whatever it takes to be where God is? Whatever it takes. Change anything. Get rid of anything. Do anything. Offer myself, ourselves fully. Just to be where God is moving, living, active, in order to redeem God's world. That's the invitation. That's the question. The importance of the question that Obed-Edom came to understand and answer is every bit as important to any of us in our day. Are we going to be willing to live in Ichabod, where the glory has departed, and just learn to live with it? Or are we going to be among those people who are not willing to do that? Will do anything or go anywhere so that we can be near to that gracious, glorious presence. Well, we don't have to worry about a box today. But the point is still the same. It is not diminished by that fact. We still get to choose whether we are going to live in Ichabod, where God is present and moving, or whether we will settle for what we have, and in the end convince ourselves that it's all there really is. 10 years ago, it was 10 years ago in June when I did the stupidest thing I ever did. I said before that I wouldn't trade it for the world, and I mean it. Because while I have failed more ways than I can count, largely due to some of the people right here in this room tonight, I have found myself again and again immersed in the glory and the presence of the one who invited me. This is our invitation, friends. Let's pray. Lord, somehow find ways again and again through the things that we think and the monotony of our experiences and all of the things that have diverted our attention or caused us to settle for living in Ichabod. Somehow, Lord, help us to see that when we've done that, we've killed something inside ourselves. But you are gracious, and you restore what has been lost. And I'm asking you tonight, Lord, for each person who is here in this place, that you would help us to become like Obed-Edom. To move whatever we have to in our life to be where you are moving, where you are moving us. Help us to trust you enough to do that and find rising up on the inside of us real life again. Genuine, deep, transformative life. It will not only change us to the core of who we are, but will change our communities and our world by its nearness. Come, O Lord, I pray. Meet us in this way and call us again to your side. For Jesus' sake. Amen.
I'd like to invite you to join me for one last song.